So in this box is a laser from AtomStack. AtomStack is a company that's been around for quite a while, and it was actually probably one of the first companies that really made the open gantry laser viable for a lot of people, and a lot of people really like their lasers. This one is a little bit different though. This is technically an open gantry laser, except they have retrofitted it to be a class 1 laser. Now I typically do an unboxing video like this, and I might show a little bit of footage, but I'm not going to do a full unboxing like I typically do. Partially because AtomStack's unboxing video is actually really good on their website, and I will link to it in the description, as well as their assembly video. There's not a whole lot of assembly needed for this. So let me get out of the box, get some things together, and we'll start putting it through its paces. I'm really excited about this one. The laser's all put together, and like I mentioned before, it didn't take a whole lot to put it together. It's mainly just mounting the laser head, air hose, connecting one wire, and power, and it's pretty much ready to go. Now this version here is already pre-wired for the enclosure. So when I turn it on, there's an alarm that sounds because it's expecting to have the enclosure on here that has a safety switch that has to be engaged before you can start the laser. So I'm going to get that going in a moment. I just want to kind of show off the laser in its final form. A lot of these lasers have been sold as the open gantry type like this, the basic A24, but you can also buy it as the kit that has the enclosure as well. And that's what we'll be putting on here in just a moment. Really quick, something I noticed that I love, and I absolutely love this, and I wish more would do it, is I see a little laser beam X there for positioning. And I absolutely love that. It is a nice little addition to the other tools built into some of the software. So quick note about this machine. Even though it's sold as an open gantry option, this was not an afterthought. These are already pre-drilled on the actual chassis itself, so you don't have to drill anything. It's already tapped. It matches up with all the paneling for the enclosure. These wires here are for the safety switch for the lid. There's that one. There's that one. This mounts on top just like this. At this point, I have both sides on, and these are really rigid. Sometimes when you get an aftermarket kit like this, it's kind of wonky. It doesn't really kind of work right, but that is definitely not the case here. This is roughly about 1/4 inch acrylic, cast acrylic, that has the correct tone for it to block the laser light. It's not floppy at all. It's actually a very rigid piece of acrylic. And something else that I noticed I want to point out that I think is really important is that all the braces here at all the corners and what screws into the base are all steel. It's not going to warp, it's not going to move, it's going to keep its structure the way it should. And it looks like we have some nice bright LEDs here, although I've not turned it on yet, so I'm not really sure how bright they are, but I'm pretty sure they're going to be pretty bright for this structure, which is nice. I wasn't really intending to show a play-by-play of this, but with that back panel on, it really turns it into a solid, rigid machine. Adds quite a bit of weight too. The cast acrylic is not light in terms of weight, but it's actually a really good thing. I think it might look a little bit twisted right now, but that's because the tray I have here in the bottom isn't square to anything. But this build is really nice. It's probably going to be a really good, affordable option for a lot of people who want to get into the laser game. They may not have a lot of area for one either. There's not a really large cutting area. There's a good sized one. It's going to be a lot easier to work in the machine in this format. But this will get a lot of people started, and that I think is a really good thing. So far, I'm really impressed with the AtomStack. It's all put together and ready to go. So now all we have to do is the AtomStack A24 is a 20-watt diode laser that features a 365 by 305 millimeter work area, and also has an ultrafine laser dot that measures 0.08 by 0.06, I believe, millimeters, which is actually pretty fine. And that's actually where this machine shines quite a bit with its engraving and the top speed. Their advertised material says that this tops out at about 24,000 millimeters a minute, which is pretty fast. I didn't quite run it that fast for my test. I ran it at 20,000 millimeters a minute, which is still pretty fast. And I did that for my engrave test. And I also ran my cut test as well, which I'll talk about in a few moments. The version that I have here is the typical A24, which is the unibody construction where the gantry, well not the gantry, but the rest of the structure of the machine is all one piece. And then we have the enclosure on top, which does turn it into a class 1 laser. The laser did come with some additional materials, so where if there's any kind of light leaking out, you have a foam rubber sealant that you can put on those areas. I have not experienced that with this machine. It's actually been pretty solid. And it's made really well, in addition, which is great. Some of the first enclosures that came out for these types of lasers were a kind of a floppy mesh material that had certain small windows you could look through for the laser, but this is a much, much better solution for this setup and retroactively fixes an open gantry and turns it into a more usable and friendly machine for pretty much everyone. I've had the machine for about a week and a half at this point. I've run several tests with it, and I'm going to share some of those findings with you right now. So the engrave test went pretty much as I would expect. Most 20-watt lasers, if calibrated correctly, will engrave really, really well. Typically the way it works is the lower the wattage, the finer the laser dot you can get, but even with a 20 dot, you can get a pretty good engraving. Cutting, on the other hand, is a slightly different story. With most 20-watt lasers, the cutting speed is about 10 millimeters a second or 600 millimeters a minute, depending on how you do that kind of equation there, which is a lot slower than its 40-watt cousins and definitely a lot slower than CO2 machines. But for the most part, I find it an acceptable speed. I'm getting really good cuts, and even with larger production runs, I'm still able to manage that and work that into my timetable. This machine, however, is a little bit slower. Now, part of that might be the material that I'm cutting. The MDF that I've been testing with requires a little bit slower speed, not by much, but just a little bit. But even then, I'm still able to get a really good cut and really usable parts. And that's really what it kind of comes down to and what I'm looking for in this machine. So aside from the testing that I've done, the engraving, the cutting, and just the general evaluation of the machine, I want to kind of finish up with going over 5 things I like and then 5 things I don't like about the machine. So I'm going to start with the things that I don't like. Now, I want to preface this a little bit that these 5 things that I'm pointing out are not quite nitpicking, but it's based on what I've seen in other machines that might do it just a little bit better. So here are the 5 things. Item number 1. The laser itself does not natively come with a honeycomb tray. It is a separate purchase, which is fine. There are a lot of companies that run it that way, and they do it that way to kind of keep initial costs down. So if you already have a honeycomb tray, if you have a different solution you'd like to use, you don't have to pay a higher cost just because it includes this. You could buy it after the fact or add it onto the package if you want, which is fine. And the honeycomb tray is a pretty good quality. The one thing that I have an issue with is there is nothing, to my knowledge here, that actually locks it in place. In fact, if I have it all the way up against this rail right here, there's about an inch gap on this side. Now, what I actually might end up doing is creating some sort of wedge or some sort of like filler to hold that in, and then I have kind of a consistent method of lining this up in here. So it's a pretty easy problem to solve. But once again, when you're looking at fit and finish and trying to have a turnkey solution for people, that would have been nice. Either an add-on, something that comes with the machine that will kind of fill that gap and just make it so the alignment is a little bit more consistent in this. So that's item 1. Item 2 here has to do with wiring. Now, one thing I do like is that all the wiring goes to only one power outlet. So we have the air pump, we have the exhaust, and we have the general power of the laser all going to one little Y cable here. And it's managed with this switch. So clicks on and off, which is fine. The downside is this side of the cable plugs into the exhaust, and it's either on or off. So if I turn the machine on, it automatically kicks on. There's no switch directly only for the fan. Once again, it's not a really big deal because if it bothers me that much, I could just unplug it here and it kind of solves the problem. But having an additional switch here or wired just a little bit differently would have been a nice kind of better solution than what we have here. Once again, easy to deal with, but it's something that probably should have been a little bit better. Item 3, this laser does not have a motor for the Z adjustment going up and down. We're still looking at a manual movement of undoing those 2 thumb screws, setting the height, and then tightening them. It's not that big of a deal. It really isn't. And they even include this little engraving block, or not engraving block, but this little focus block to tell you the optimal height for cutting and the optimal height for engraving. So you set down your block, you raise up your laser. If I could do this with one hand, you sit underneath and you tighten it. The thumb screws are a little bit awkward, especially if you're closer to the end here of the gantry. Once again, just like everything else I'm mentioning, it's not necessarily wrong. It's a little bit of an inconvenience. Something I will say in their favor, though, is that it might seem weird to have this double knob, but with it moving so fast, between 20 and 24,000 millimeters a minute, having this little backup screw right there to where they're both tight is going to prevent it from kind of shaking loose and falling onto the piece that you're trying to engrave. And I have had that happen with other lasers. So the fact that we have kind of like this redundancy here in this backup is a fairly good idea, especially because we're still looking at a manual focus. Speaking of focusing, this is item number 4. Now, I'm going to point this out with this machine, but it's probably not just with this machine. We don't have dynamic focusing here, but we do have an issue here with these 2 different heights for engraving and cutting. Because if you have a singular project that has engraving and cutting, you need to build a stop into your G-code in Lightburn to reset your focus. Although, honestly, what I'm doing is I'm just leaving it at the cutting height and engraving at that height as well. I haven't seen that big of a difference, but that cutting height is probably the more important one to make sure you're able to cut in a decent manner. So a little bit of a quandary there. If anybody has any solutions or any recommendations, I'm open to hearing those, but that is something that is kind of interesting. I wonder if they should just kind of split the difference and call that the optimal range, but I'm not too sure. Okay, so that's number 4. One more item to go. And the final item that is something that is a little bit weird with the machine is that it has so many points of connection and turning it on. You have this safety key connection. You have a weird switch emergency stop. So instead of the big red plunger that's on most machines, it is this button right here. So you have 1, you have 2, and you have a little switch over here as 3 that turns everything on. So you have this weird sequence of 3 different ways of turning the machine on and turning them off, and you have to make sure that they're all engaged in the on position. I know that some of these are a result of a safety feature, but it seems a little bit awkward having these 3 different points. Weird, not wrong, but to be honest, it hasn't gotten in the way of doing any work on this machine. But once or twice I turn it on and I realize that one of the other things aren't engaged. I have to look at it and then get it turned on. Not a big deal, just a little bit interesting. Even with those 5 things, those are pretty minor contention points with the laser itself. Everything else has been really good. And now for the 5 things I like. So we're going to end on a higher note with these right here. That's going to really highlight the benefits of this specific machine. So first, the enclosure. I really like the format of this enclosure. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a lab that has petri dishes in it, that has like an exhaust port on it. It looks like something that would have petri dishes in it. But the viewing angle, basically from all sides, you can always see your work. And it feels a lot more approachable. And you're not working inside of a bucket like some other lasers that I've tested recently. It feels a lot more welcoming, and it's easier to work inside when you have to place your piece, move things around. Let me show you. This enclosure has a really nice large, and that alarm is because I lifted the lid, has a large hinged front. And that gives you a really wide access into the machine. The case itself has these steel brackets as reinforcement for the case. And the hinges are also steel. It's not pneumatic, but it does hold in place until you get to about a certain point here, and then it'll come down. It doesn't have a soft stop on its own, so you have to make sure you kind of place it and then come down. The case itself, the big open area to work in, that's benefit number one. Number two, this bright LED lighting inside the case is probably some of the best I've seen in one of the machines. I've seen the LED strips kind of stuck on and start falling off in other machines, but this looks like a little bit more of an official fixture. Lights it up better. My eyes aren't as good as they used to be, so I do need more light when I'm looking at and placing my work. So that is definitely a benefit. Number three, I think we're on three, is safety. We have actual kind of limit switches there that will detect when the lid is open or closed. And these little rubber dowels right there is what engages with those limit switches. Nice little safety feature. Number four, I'm going to lose count really quick on these. There is an integrated camera, which I'm actually in the process of trying to set up. There is a process for focusing and getting it kind of dialed in. And I think it goes along with our app, and it also interfaces with a light burn as well. I have not directly tested that. I might do that in a future video. Or if I could get it kind of dialed in quickly enough for this one, I will feature it here. If not, I'll do some sort of follow-up for it. Something else I really like, and it's kind of hard to demonstrate here, is expandability. There is a 2 watt, a 10 watt, this is the 20 watt, and according to their site, there's a 48 watt also on the way. So if you want a single machine that has a lot more capabilities, you can definitely do that with this as well. There's also a connection port for a rotary. In its current setup, it is not capable of using a rotary, but there is a riser base that is sold that allows for that expansion as well. If you like having a touchscreen interface, there's also a port for that on the machine. So there's a lot of options here. Now, something I'm going to mention that I think is a benefit, even though it may not be considered a benefit for a lot of people, is that this size is actually fairly small and compact. In fact, I'll put something up on the screen right here that kind of shows the comparison between this, the WeCreate, and the Xtool S1 in terms of engraving size. It is not a really large area. There's no pass-through built in here. But for people that have a limited space in their shop, or maybe they want to be able to go to different areas and bring the laser with them, maybe like a craft show, because it is enclosed, it's a lot easier to do that with this machine being smaller like it is. It's a pretty good solution for somebody that is just kind of getting started. Because of the size of the machine, because of the power of the laser, it's perfectly suitable to do like small production runs. I don't know about a full business, maybe a little bit more of a hobby, but definitely for somebody just starting out, or in addition to a larger machine that you might already have that can be dedicated for smaller parts, or maybe eventually you want it dedicated as a rotor machine that can do tumblers and other cylindrical items. It is a great option for that. Overall, I'm really happy with this machine. I like the open design, and also it's more of an aesthetic thing, but I kind of like that Iron Man red that they threw on there to kind of stand out just a little bit. AtomStack did a great job with this machine. And now I need to find a place for it in my shop and figure out which one is going to get moved out of its usual spot. I'm still trying to get rid of that pile of useless right there. Anyways, back to the AtomStack. So AtomStack did send me out this laser for review, but I'm not receiving any kind of compensation otherwise. There's no commission structure, nothing else has been agreed upon, just that I would do a review for this video and show it off to all of you. Now, like I say, just about all my videos, I want you to pick the best option that fits you and your shop and what you plan on making, because that really is supposed to be the goal of all of this, is to make cool stuff. So if you made it this far in the video, I want to once again thank you. I have a lot of videos in the back catalog that you might find of interest, and not just review videos. I have a lot of DIY projects, other things I've done with my family. They're in the back catalog, and I'm sure you'll find some things that you find interesting and helpful, I hope. If you'd like to help out the channel and are financially able to do so, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/GeekBuilders. For paid members, I have a bunch of files you can download at your leisure. If you'd also like to check out those files and you're not a paid member, you can also download some of them for a small fee. Unfortunately, Patreon controls the pricing on those, not me. That's why they are the price that they are. If you'd like to pick up one of these lasers for yourself, and I highly suggest you at least check that out if you're in the market for one. Current pricing as of this video with the enclosure and the 24-watt laser is about $9.99. I just saw that the 48-watt is available for about $12.99, and that includes the honeycomb tray, the enclosure, and the air assist, which is a pretty big beefy air assist, which is needed for the cutting on this machine. Once again, thank you for making it this far in the video. I will be back with a couple other videos coming soon. I have one more laser review to do that's coming up. I have one accessory, and then it's going to be back to a lot of the DIY projects and laser projects as well. So please stay tuned for all of that. In the meantime, don't forget to design, make, and play. See you later.